Okay, so we will go ahead and get started then. So thank you all so much for everybody who is in attendance. Thank you for these amazing panelists who are before us, and of course my student leaders who you have seen, I think, on probably every one of our panelists so far. In a second here, we'll introduce everybody, but I just wanted to say welcome to our fifth social justice webinar. Today we'll be discussing our current housing crisis and issues dealing with houselessness and homelessness here in Portland. It's become almost an impossible topic to ignore if you are anywhere in Portland, whether you're seeing it as you drive to work or you are turning on the news at night. So we are here today to hopefully get a little bit of sense of what's happening and most importantly, how we can help. But before we jump into introductions, I want to start all things as we do in prayer, and I'll turn that over to Mary Grace to lead us.
Yeah, so let us remember
that we're in the holy presence of God.
God, remind us that we have a responsibility to provide both physical and spiritual support for those in need, that we have a duty to feed the hungry and to bless the poor. Help us know that we also have a responsibility to provide shelter for those who are homeless. We have a duty to clothe those in need and to visit the sick. For the Gospel of Matthew says, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. And I was in prison and you came to me." Matthew 25, 35 through 36. St. John Baptiste de La Salle,
pray for us.
Live Jesus in our hearts
forever. Thank you, MG. So why don't we start with our student leaders? Just introduce yourself and your grade and what made you want to be part of this panel or what you hope to gain from it. Anyone can start.
I guess I'll start. I'm Mary Grace. I'm a senior. I hold the position of officer of service, so I work directly with Miss Mayor. And something that I really want to gain is a perspective that I personally do not have and do not fully, I guess, have the understanding of the housing crisis in Portland. So I really want to learn what is actually happening and not what the media says, but hearing the stories of real people interacting with those.
Thank you. Go ahead, Cameron.
Hi, I'm Cameron Houghton. I'm a sophomore here at LaSalle, and I'm hoping to gain, just like MG, just an understanding that isn't what everyone generally thinks homelessness is, and to know the facts and to know what we can do to make the community stronger.
I'm Naya. I'm a junior at LaSalle, and I'm just really excited to hear different perspectives and to learn more about the issue.
Thank you. And then Naya, do you want to start to introduce our panelists?
So first we have Kristen Tierney. Miss Tierney experienced both drug addiction as well as houselessness here in Portland and has written an amazing book about her experience called Cracked Not Broken. Here she is to tell us a little bit more about herself. Miss Tierney.
Thank you. So as she mentioned, I am an author, speaker, and community advocate. Having gone through and survived what most don't, I feel it's my duty and obligation to lend my voice to those that have either lost theirs or have yet to find theirs. And I have a unique perspective having been on the front line. And yeah, I think that I don't think people understand what we're talking about when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about addiction, when we talk about prostitution, all these issues of social justice. So it's my hope that something I say or share possibly expands someone's perspective or even slightly changes it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. Now we have Darius Yao, who has experienced at both St. Francis Dining Hall and Catholic Charities of Portland. He has started his own nonprofit called Portland Central Kitchen. Mr. Jones? Oh, excuse me, Mr. Yao.
No worries. Again, thank you very much, everyone. I am new to all of this. For many years, worked in the industry, working 100 hours a week, 130 hours a week, and never was able to really give over to my community until the pandemic started. I'm formerly the emergency culinary director of Catholic Charities. And with what I was doing was we were providing up to 15,000 meals per week to the food insecure, whether that is the houseless and whether that is people who are housed. I pushed the limits because there's so much concentration on all these subgroups of who gets to eat, when they get to eat. And so with that, it also gave a different perspective of being the boots on the ground, being on the front lines every day, not necessarily calling the shots from an office per se, but also being in the community, engaging with the community to better understand, what was happening, what has happened, what can be different, how we can work together as a community. And my goal with Portland Central Kitchen is to cut through a lot of bureaucratic red tape and be a voice of the people and bring more knowledge and really do away with a lot of the misconceptions why people are houseless. I also have been houseless in my life, and I've worked with many people in the culinary industry who have also suffered from that. And so my responsibility as a veteran of this country is to continue to serve my community and to not only help those who are hungry, but also to just help educate one another and the community and how we can all start coming together as one voice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yao. Now we have Mr. Craig Lockridge from St. Vincent de Paul, where he works and holds the position as the Emergency Services Manager. Mr. Lockridge.
Hi, thank you, Mary Grace. I'm glad to be here. As she said, I'm the Emergency Services Manager here at St. Vincent de Paul. Prior to coming here, I worked a lot in some nonprofits as a volunteer, but mostly worked in corporate America in a number of capacities, most recently spending 15 years as a real estate broker. And I decided in 5-6 years ago that I wanted to kind of get out of the corporate world and really focus more on the nonprofits where I'd been volunteering. So I went back to school to work on a master's degree in business administration with an intentional focus on nonprofit management, and wound up here at St. Vincent de Paul, where what I expected was a lot different really than what I was looking for originally, but love it now. And that is, helping people trying to prevent becoming homeless, but also serving the homeless. We have multiple roles that we serve here. One, of course, is trying to provide rent and utility assistance to people who are still housed, but on the verge of losing their housing. We also serve hot meals to people who are low income and people who are homeless. And then we also have another program where we operate a pantry that serves people who come in for food. Probably about 40 to 45% of those folks are people who don't have a permanent place to stay. And so as part of my MBA program, I also did a project on homelessness and trying to find ways to alleviate the need for housing. That was in 2016 that I finished that, by the way. That's all I got.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lockridge. Lastly, we have Miss Eileen Devine, who works as the National Director for VHA's Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Program, and joins us again for her insight and compassion on the topic. Ms. Devine.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be a part of this panel and hearing from the other panelists. I'm really honored to be in their company and hear about the amazing work that they're doing. The program that I run at the national level is within the Veterans Health Administration. So working specifically with veterans. I'm a social worker by training, worked at the Portland VA for many years, actually oversaw the homeless programs for the Portland VA Medical Center for many years. But now I work at the national level, and the program that I oversee provides funding and support to medical centers around the country to do outreach to homeless veterans, also partner with community agencies for emergency shelters, beds specifically for veterans. And one of the things that we take a look at a lot are the root causes of the issues that we're working on. So in my sphere of the VA world, it's homelessness, and how we can develop policy, how we can work with Congress, who is our ultimate boss in the federal world, to put funding into place in places that it makes sense, where it's going to actually make a difference. So it's this patient persistence with the red tape and the bureaucracy, so that we can always have our eye on that end goal of serving the veterans, the homeless veterans in our communities, and making sure that we're really speaking to their needs and what they need most.
Thank you so much. My first question is to all of the panelists. If you had to sum up what has happened in our city for the last 10 years when it comes to people experiencing homelessness, how would you go about answering that question?
I can go ahead and get us started, at least from my perspective, what I've seen happen over the last 10 years. And not just in Portland. I mean, this is really an issue that a lot of cities, especially on the West Coast, are dealing with. If you look at cities like San Francisco, LA, other coastal cities, the housing prices, the affordability of living in Portland is not what it was 10 years ago. So the housing stock, what we call housing stock, meaning the availability of affordable housing, has gone down. And the cost of living in Portland has gone up at the same time. And so that, of course, doesn't take a whole lot to see how that's going to mismatch. And the result of that is that many more people who maybe could afford some affordable housing, low-income housing 10 years ago, no longer can. Even when they're working full-time at a job that pays minimum wage or even slightly above minimum wage, that affordability is just not there. And so when we have lots of people moving here, wanting to live in Portland, and we have a landlord who has an available unit, and they're able to either rent to someone who is experiencing houselessness and maybe doesn't have a great credit history and has some challenges that they've been working through, or they have somebody who shows more stability, who are they going to rent to, right? So really that issue as well, a lot of what we try to do is work with landlords and educating them on the issue of houselessness and why it is to the benefit of their community and really to their business to rent to folks who are experiencing houselessness. So that would be my 2 cents.
I would also add on to what Mrs. Devine was saying. From my perspective also, and moving to Portland 11 years ago, a lot of it does, not only does it have to do with the rising costs, but also being a chef for 20 years. There's this big glamour of being a cook or being a chef and whatnot, but when you look at the wages and you look at a city like New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, Milwaukee, Wisconsin even, and also Portland and Seattle, if you're serious about one's career, you want to move to a city to learn more, to gain more, to, cut your teeth, if you will. And so those wages never match up with the cost of living. And one of the biggest misconceptions that so many people that I believe have in our society is that, and one of the things that the pandemic has really taught all of us is it doesn't matter, where we come from, what education skill level we have, if we're a doctor, an engineer, a chef, a cook, a mechanic, it doesn't matter. If you lose your job and your bills come due, like mine have, for example, in the past, and you find yourself like, okay, do I pay my mortgage or do I pay my truck payment? I always paid my truck payment. The reason was because come hell or high water, I would be living in my truck, which I did. And so, you know, with that, and trying to also navigate, and something that I have learned from the streets this last year is someone who is on that brink of becoming houselessness or becoming houseless, or someone who really wants to work, someone who wants to be able to take care of themselves and not a system. The system, in my belief, is set up for 100% to push back against those who want, you know, who want to work. Well, you haven't had a job in 2 years because you've been houseless. I don't want you. I'm not going to give you a job. Oh, you have, you know, you $1,000 to your name and you can afford this rent. Well, now I'm going to charge you $4,000 for first month, last month, and your direct and a down deposit. So, and I've been in this situation. I'm speaking specifically from my experiences and what I have experienced, and also what I have encountered in the last 10 years across the nation. So it's, how can we move one step forward when there's a system created to push us back? You know, one step forward, 2 steps back, and so forth, and you just lose that momentum. And I've also known many people, I've come to know many people in this last year specifically who choose to be houseless. And that was something that was a little bit of a shock to me. They're like, I work part-time to almost full-time. I'm saving up. I'm trying to figure it out. I want to buy a car so I can work more. And, you know, there's also need to be services for those types, for that percentage of a community that is choosing, whether we agree with it or not, or whether society agrees with it or not, they are choosing this right. And, you know, how can we also provide benefits for them, from them as well? I think that's all I have to say on the matter for now.
So what I was going to say is that it's such a layered problem that's gotten away from us. There's mental health issues, there's addiction issues, there's domestic violence. And not only has it gotten, the system is ill-equipped to deal with these layers, there aren't enough shelter beds, there aren't enough resources. You know, then the resources that are there, from what I understand, what I've read, it's a backlog. So you have this person that needs help, and 90 days out, we'll get back to you. And people don't understand that we're all 1 or 2 bad decisions away from something getting out of our control. I mean, you don't look at me and think of someone that, oh, that person was once homeless. And then I think that there's a stigma that people that don't really understand all the moving pieces look at it as either it's not my problem or they must be bad people. No, maybe they made bad choices, but who are we to judge? We don't know the backstory. So I think that it's just on so many levels, we don't understand, nor are we equipped to really address it. And it's gotten away from us.
Well, if I might chime in, I would have to agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said here. The one thing I would say is that you know, it's not always bad choices that cause people to wind up in homelessness. You know, many times it's through an individual, or not through the fault of the individual, that they wind up in that situation. I have personally had a couple of very close friends become homeless, living out of their cars because of a decision that was made, you know, at their work, and you know, or something that happened in their life. With respect to you know, a divorce or something like that, and you know, you know, it's not society's fault, but it's just a reality that not everybody you know, either chooses to be homeless or winds up there because they made a bad choice. Certainly there are those people who do that. The one thing that I've noticed, especially in the research that I did for my master's capstone project, and even trying to update my knowledge in recent days, is that Oregon, unfortunately, historically has had one of the highest rates of homelessness in the entire nation. Back in about 2015, the rate of homelessness in Oregon, in terms of the number of homeless per 1,000 people, was like 5th highest in the entire country. And the numbers of homeless, if you go back historically and look at time counts of people who are homeless and other data, the number has been fairly stable. It was really high, as you can imagine, post 2008, when the economy was really bad. and then started to decline after that, and then has leveled off for the most part. You know, you get these little blips where the numbers go up and then they go down. So, you know, the number of homeless hasn't gone up, but I can tell you 10 years ago, if you were driving along I-205 or I-5 or I-84 or the major streets in Portland, you wouldn't see encampments, people living under shopping carts, you know, that kind of thing like you do today. And part of that is to the fact that I think people live, and I can't, you know, this is just, you know, kind of my personal experience in terms of research. I haven't been homeless myself, so I can't say this, but I feel like people want to live where they're close to other people and where they're close to the services that they need. And it used to be that local cities, city councilors, politicians, law enforcement would do everything they could to get people off the streets, sidewalks, freeways, and so forth. But because of court decisions in recent years, they're no longer able to use those tools that they had used. And I'm not saying it was right or wrong to you know, send people packing or to arrest them or whatever. I'm just saying that's one thing that has changed to make people who don't have a permanent place to stay more visible to the rest of the public. So it looks like the number of people without a home is just skyrocketing in the Portland area. And the reality is it's a horrible problem, again, you know, highest in the nation, but it's, you know, it hasn't gotten really worse, definitely hasn't gotten better. And there's a lot that needs to be done. You know, like I said, everyone who's been talking has just touched on that. It's just such a complex issue with so many moving parts. It's really hard to solve.
Thank you all for those answers. So follow-up question to that is, how has COVID impacted our city when dealing with houselessness?
Well, I'll take the lead. I'll take the lead on that question first. In a positive manner, it provided me an opportunity to better help my community and send me back to school to also pursue my master's. And that is solely because of a lot of bureaucracy, and a lot of the services have been cut. And I speak specifically of St. Francis Dining Hall, or what I call the St. Francis Dining Hall District. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but it is located at Southeast 11th between Oak and Pine. And it has been very controversial for a very long time. And when the pandemic came about, all the services that were there were either limited or cut 100%. You know, it was a radical hospitality, you know, and it had a lot of, you know, it had a mental health clinician, it had a nurse, had a clothing drive or clothing closet, toiletries, congregation for hot meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 5 to 6 days a week. And when I said earlier, you know, and that's how I became really involved in this, and understanding it's not just about a hot meal. And I think we can all agree on that everything is connected and there's so many different layers. And when you start cutting all these services as a mental health clinician or a housing support specialist or you know, healthcare specialist of any sort, or even a case manager that can help with food stamps, and those just vanish, and then they go to either larger organizations or perhaps be cut altogether, and then it just comes down to a hot meal, which is great, but at the same time there's not enough support. And I personally feel that in our community, in our, not only in our state and our local county, but also on a federal level, we're not doing nearly enough that I feel like we can all agree on to how do we snap back from the pandemic? How do we continue? I'm kind of tired of hearing let's go back to the normal, because as we all know, normal was not cutting it, and we have to fight for change. We have to create change, and there's still a very much misconnect. When I left my position last month and decided to go launch Portland Central Kitchen, there's too much of a disconnect of agencies and providers. And what I mean by that is some have very, very limited services. But if, for example, in my experience in the last year, if someone came to me looking for a hot meal and a cup of coffee, I was dressing wounds, I was giving them tents, I was giving them clothing, I was helping them get men or women who were looking for shelter from and escaping domestic abuse. I was assisting them, trying to do everything I could as one person, which is a lot for one person to do, to try to just keep it duct taped together, to keep it glued together. And so many times I was told, not your job. Well, if it's not my job, then whose job is it? Because I'm the one here. And so, and I think that's a great metaphor for the entire system, is we're not providing enough services, especially from the river to 82nd from or in on the southeast side of Portland. And I feel like that's also another hit by the pandemic as well. There's more services on the west side of the river in downtown Portland than on the east side. And we still, as a community and our government, has still yet to provide additional services onto the east side for all community members, whether they're houseless, whether they're a recovering addict, or whether they want to become clean, or whether they just need a hot meal and a fresh shirt. We're still not doing that. I think that answers the question.
I think this is a great question, because I think it's important to look at how COVID has impacted this population, especially. There's just no argument that they have been more impacted than most communities. So if you I look at it two ways. One way is when we look at the research behind what those experiencing houselessness have in terms of higher vulnerabilities for illnesses, physical illnesses, life expectancy is much lower, so on and so forth. And then we look at COVID and what makes you more susceptible, more vulnerable to COVID. A lot of those things line up. So already they're at a disadvantage. The other thing that I think about is, what do we keep hearing are the two things that we need to be doing to keep ourselves safe and those around us safe? It's washing our hands and creating distance. 6 feet apart, wash our hands. What do people experiencing houselessness not have access to? A place to regularly wash their hands, and the ability, the privilege of having distance from other people. So I mentioned that in my position, we work with community agencies to develop contracts for emergency housing. And what we've seen, and I'm guessing that it's applied to Portland as well, is these agencies have really had to scramble in terms of like, oh my gosh, how do we, if it's a dorm type style setup where they have bunk beds, however many feet apart, how do we make this, adhere to these CDC guidelines to keep our community safe? Well, what that means is decreasing bed capacity. So they're not able to admit as many people as they were before to the shelter beds. So what does that mean? There's more people on the street, right? It's this domino effect. Now, there's been lots of efforts to help shelters in that position be able to create capacity and so on and so forth. But that's no easy lift. That doesn't happen overnight. That's a huge, huge lift for them. And they're already in the midst of this crisis, right? So I think in my mind, those are the two biggest factors that I think about with homelessness and COVID.
I would say that shelter space was insufficient even before COVID. There was already a shortage of it. At St. Vincent de Paul, it totally changed the way we did business. The way we served folks was to have them come into our building. Homeless people could come in here and get off the street, take a load off their feet, kind of hang out in our waiting room, at least during the daytime. We're sort of an 8 to 5 business, so it didn't help them at night, but it helped them come in, get warm, get out of the rain, get out of the weather. And at the same time, they could also come and get food. And COVID basically just caused us to close our building. We still continue to come to work and try and find other creative ways to serve the people that we do in terms of helping them avoid losing their home, helping them avoid, more importantly right now, because you got this eviction moratorium going on, just having their debts pile up and pile up and pile it up, so that once the moratoria are discontinued, they'll just lose their home anyway. So we're trying to help address that issue as well. But the one thing we noticed, because we also operate sort of a call center, if you will, for our local church pantries, that a lot of our volunteers that work in those pantries are over the age of 65. And a lot of those folks, considering themselves in a high risk group for COVID, quit. Back in toward the end of March of last year, by the beginning of April, in the building where I work, where you get probably 25 of people in our workforce who were active volunteers, we went from that number down to 1. Everybody but 1 quit, and I had to practically try and kick him out of the building, and he still wouldn't go. Everybody was still afraid. And of course we were concerned for his health. And it took time to, build back that volunteer force and get volunteers back into the building. At the same time, there was a big shift in resources. Some of those church pantries that we take calls for and arrange food boxes through, because their volunteers quit or were afraid of developing COVID, they shifted the way they conducted their activities. Some were drop-in pantries where anyone who wanted to could come in and pick up a food box. And some of those closed their drop-in pantries and shifted to doing what they call touchless delivery. Basically, if you had an address and you had a phone so they could arrange the delivery time, their volunteers would take a box to your home, basically put the box on the porch, ring the doorbell, and run. If you were homeless, you couldn't access that anymore, that food you might have gotten there, because you don't have an address. You may or may not have a phone, but you don't have a regular address where someone could prearrange to bring that food to you a lot of the time. That was, I think, probably the biggest thing. And then, of course, another aspect was access to, because people who are homeless have these health issues that make them more susceptible, and we do as well for our volunteers. There are all these requirements around hygiene and masking, face coverings, if you will, and a lot of folks who don't have a regular place to live don't or didn't have access to those things. So we had to try and find a way to kind of get those supplies out to people. But on the other hand, which we did, but on the other hand, we would have people come in. They're not used to wearing a mask or not used to wearing some kind of a face covering. And so they come in without one. And we tell them that if they want to access our services, they have to have one now. We'd say, we'll give you one for free. Here you go. And some folks, again, not being used to that, just refused. No, they would get, we had particular instances on our mobile kitchen where people would just blow up in anger, start throwing things, yelling at our volunteers. It's just, again, it's not something that folks are used to doing. So, I mean, there's just, again, so many things.
Thank you. I know that these are hard questions to answer, but my next one is, what are some common myths surrounding homelessness, and how would you address those with what is actually happening?
Well, if I might, I'll, if we do this in a rotation here. I know, just in my own experience, and this is the way I feel, but maybe I'm wrong. I have a lot of people talk about how they're afraid of people who are homeless, either because they think they're violent or they're dangerous, or whatever it is. And my perception is, the reality is that a very small minority of people who don't have a home are actually either mentally ill to the point or just ill behaved to the point where they're violent or dangerous. I've read some research also that backs up that really people who are houseless are more likely to be harmed or hurt by someone who is not than to harm someone who is not. Around here in my, and I have to admit, in the 3.5+ years that I've been here, this has really been my first interaction dealing with people on a day-to-day basis who don't have a home, and I've never been afraid. And you have people, or you have issues from time to time with people who get angry. And I got to tell you, working in customer service at a major package delivery company for quite a few years, I had just as big of problems with our customers there getting irate, yelling, swearing. Sometimes you felt more threatened by them than any of the folks around here who are homeless. And it's all it's kind of strange, but I don't know, maybe it's counterintuitive, but some of the people here who look the scariest are actually the most tame and kindest. So anyway.
I would also like to add to that, just briefly, with what Mr. Lockridge was saying. Kind of earlier, the last question or 2 questions ago, I talked about dressing people's head wounds, and that is because this past late last summer into this late winter, the increased violence towards the houseless community skyrocketed to so much where I was seeing it, and hearing it from 1 to 2 people in my line, and you kind of like have that thought, like, okay, was there a fight just between 2 individuals? Because that does happen. Next day, 3 or 4 people. Next day, 7 or 8, and so on. And you guys can kind of see where I'm going with this. And I started getting on the phone, calling the mayor's office, calling the police chief's office, trying to get the attention of the police, because this is much greater than just me. And what was happening, the people that I was building trust and communication with and building a history with were confiding in me. And they were being jumped. They were being jumped by people in cars, being jumped with, in the name of, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, in the name of Black Lives Matter, I'm doing this to you. And I witnessed a lot of that on the compound or in the district in which I was working, and I continue to serve to this day. And it wasn't just happening in my area. It was happening over in North Portland. It was happening underneath the bridges. And we have this misconception that because you're houseless, you are an addict, you're a victim, or you are a con or an ex-felon. You have all these misconceptions, but we always forget that we're all just human beings, and we can't, we need to support one another better. And it was a huge wake-up call of seeing these people that I know on a day-to-day basis now were confiding in me, and I was trying to utilize my privilege of where I was working at as a voice between the police department and these community members, saying, if you don't want to speak to the police, no problem. Speak to me. Give me the details, and I can report this. I can work with the police. But those numbers have, I think, flexed a little bit, and they flex up and they flex down, and I feel like a lot of it does carry on from people's vendetta or the neighborhood and where camps pop up, and people want to have this vigilante sense of violence towards the houseless. But one of, going back earlier in our conversation with questions, I do feel like one of the misconceptions is, even to this day in this pandemic, that we've woken up, or so many people have understood, I can't be homeless. How is that possible? I have a college degree. I'm married. I have a great job. And people I still meet and have this community to this day, still tell me these things. People that I've worked with, colleagues of mine, they're like, that can never happen to me. And we don't know everyone's backstory. And I think that's also an issue if we're not willing to, because we want to be concerned about the person on the corner asking for $1 or $2, or we want to be concerned about this camp. We want to call the police, or we want to act out towards this community instead of trying to understand. First of all, just introduce yourself. What's your name? And not trying to pry the door open of like, hey, why are you houseless? Why are you here? It's just like, let's start a dialogue with our community. People want to look at, we always consider looking at, and I say we as a society, we want to continue to look at all the negativity of those who are houseless. And we're not necessarily willing to open up a dialogue. And I would agree with Craig, not once have I been afraid. I pride myself on doing things a little bit differently in Portland because I'm really tired of bureaucracy and politics. And I'm just being a veteran. I prefer the way of getting things done. And if I need to go into some of these areas to provide meals or basic toiletries or necessities, I'm not there to judge them. I'm there to assist them. And if I can provide trust and honesty and communication with these people, then we're going to have more of a relationship than if I'm just like, this is a popular one that happens around Portland. I'm afraid of these houseless people. I'm just going to drop these meals off and run. There's 200 meals. Fight it out for yourselves. Who cares? And I'm going to run. With what I do, I just want to be able to build that bridge, a stronger bridge, and that bigger line of communication.
As I'm listening to the other panelists talk about their thoughts on this question, one thing that I would just encourage everyone listening to be curious about is when you hear definitive statements about houseless people, to really look at, well, how do I know that's true? Like, to be curious about why that somebody is so sure about that statement. There's a lot of research that has taken place with this population to really get at the root of homelessness. And oftentimes the things that we think are the cause, like drug addiction or just not wanting to work, right, are just symptoms of it. And what they're finding is that what is the underlying factor, the commonality, the common denominator for those experiencing homelessness is trauma and loss. And that can take all different forms, right? So if we start there, then it really leads us down a different path to understanding the issue and also the people experiencing the issue. The other myth that I think is just huge in terms of the way that we deliver services to homeless individuals is looking at this as housing is not a right, it's something you earn. And if we look at what's called a housing first model, which is a best practice, there's lots of research to support this model, that we need to get individuals into a safe place and get them a home first. And then maybe once they have, dry clothes and a place to sleep, then maybe they will have the capacity, the energy, the resilience to be able to focus on these other things that have gotten in the way of them being homeless all these years that they experienced homelessness, right? So it's more cost effective. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why housing first is really the best practice when it comes to solving homelessness in a community. But there's all of these deeply held beliefs and values around what it means to have a home. And again, whether it's a right or whether it's something you earn, that gets in the way of communities being able to really embrace that and implement it.
I also want to add one thing to what Eileen was saying also in kind of tired of everyone, like housing is a right, food is a right, clean water is a right, healthcare. I think we can all agree with that. And that's something that I have pushed back against the system. System of former colleagues of mine have told me, you will not provide meals to these people because they're either A, houseless, because that makes a lot of sense, or because they have camps, or they have a camp in this location. They have a camp in this location. So no, they're going to, they have to move their camp. They have to do this. They have to do that because food's a privilege. Food is a right. And that's something I have always pushed back against, and I will always continue to do so. And that is something that I have seen time and time again in our local community specifically. Again, I'm speaking of my own experiences and what I've seen, what I've witnessed. There are too many agencies who are using the housing as a right or food as a right to basically try to, I've always kind of called it like you're using it as a hostage, a negotiation, which is pretty rough, when you think about it. But it's got a lot of truth to it, because who am I to tell somebody, who is trying to figure it out for themselves when they can eat, where they can eat, or how they can eat? Like, oh, I can see your tent, you got to move down the block. Make it somebody else's problem as long as it's not a problem here. And that's something that we need to continue to educate one another about and be more vocal about as a community, towards these agencies and also towards our elected officials. And we have to have a better respect, not only for one another, but also for what is a right and what is a privilege. Having a house, healthcare, food, basic clean water, education, all these things are an absolute right, and they're definitely not a privilege.
So in line with what Eileen was saying, if you're homeless, one of the myths that I hear is that if you're homeless, you should get a job. Well, if you don't have a home, it's really hard to get a job. You often, you don't have a permanent address to go to. You don't have access to showering and laundry, being able to keep your clothes clean. Most of the people, even though there are agencies out there who might help with getting an ID, most of the people that we encounter here who are homeless don't have ID, which is one of the things that an employer requires in order to get work. So without having a home, it's just really, just to say, just go get a job is fairly impractical. You need to have a home to be able to do those things. So you got to get people into housing and also address their other needs at the same time. But certainly you got to get people into housing before they can get work and get back on their feet.
Thank you so much for those really thoughtful answers. I was wondering if, Christine, you could paint us a picture of a day in the life of someone living on the streets.
It's a brutal existence where you've kind of crossed a line of no return and there's nothing familiar. There's a lot of people that aren't very kind, and it seems like everything is transactional. Nothing's done for free. I worked at Nike for the better part of a decade, and I never had to work at Nike that was as hard as a week on the streets. There's no days off. You're constantly looking at what could be the next potential threat. And then while you're looking at what could be the next potential threat, you're realizing that society's looking at you different, if they're even paying attention to you. Like I had this one life one day, and then the next day I didn't exist. And I think that that was one of the hardest parts of it, is to understand that I was being viewed differently because of where I'd ended up. And when I first got clean, I volunteered at St. Francis Kitchen on Sundays, and there was a gentleman by the name of Spider, and he told me that the best thing about coming to be fed on Sunday was my smile and the way I made time for him. Not the hot meal, not the place to come out of the cold or the shower or just to kind of catch your breath, but he felt seen. And I think that was the thing that when I was homeless, it was the same thing. I didn't exist, or if I did, I was looked down upon. And that takes a real toll on you psychologically and emotionally, because I think we all want human connection. And that's where we're all a lot more alike than we are different. Regardless of where we are on our journey, at the core of who we are, I believe that we want the same things, and that's acceptance and self-worth and, you know, being made to feel that you're a part of something. And so then to have whatever misfortune puts you on the street take place, which is traumatic enough, and then to be felt as if that you don't matter, just further kind of cements you into that or change you to that new existence. That's incredibly difficult. It was a brutal existence. Probably one of the hardest things I'll ever go through.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to be mindful of the time and invite anyone who is in attendance right now to type a question in the Q&A if they have one, and know that, you know, only we will see it, those of us who are on this panel. So feel free to type in that question. And while you're thinking of that and typing that up, I just want to throw it out here that we would love to help. And so if any of our panelists have any advice for a high school student or someone like myself of something that we could do, whether it's, you know, a way to become an advocate just on our own, or if there is something we can do for Portland Central Kitchen or St. Vincent de Paul, like a drive or something like that, please let us know. But yes, please, you know, feel free to chime in of what would you tell what would you hope that a high school student could do? One, and then two, is there something that our community can physically do for your organization?
So if I might just chime in, we have actually used high school students here before as volunteers, but it seems like we never have enough volunteers. So, you know, I understand the life of a high school student is super busy. They got all kinds of things going on besides, you know, spending a few hours at the local food bank or you know, helping in doing office work or that kind of thing, the sports and academics and all kinds of other stuff. But, you know, if you can spare, you know, 10 hours during a term or a school year, you know, that's, especially if you get a number of students who are willing to do that together, that's super helpful. The other thing that I think, speaking as a soon to be former government official / school board member, one thing that impresses me greatly as an elected official is when I hear from students. And so I would say, you know, writing to your representatives, city government, county government, state, even federal, to let them know about how you feel about issues like this is super important. Also, it's helpful when you write, not just to voice a complaint, but to offer some suggestions as well. But I do believe that elected officials love to hear from students, especially, I mean, students of any age, but especially those at the high school level, because that's when we understand that they're, you know, some students anyway are starting to get kind of more tuned into society and have a lot more input and information to share.
We do have a couple questions here, and MG is going to read those out. I think the first one is probably for Darius and Kristen specifically, but go ahead, MG.
Yeah, so from an anonymous attendee, what is the hardest thing to get when you're homeless?
For me, because I've blown my life into a million pieces, it was, what piece do you pick up first? And if you can hold on to that first piece, how are you ever going to have the strength or the courage to pick up the second piece? And it's not that I didn't want to do something different. I just didn't know where to begin. And I didn't feel worthy of reclaiming my life. I felt, you know, there's a lot of shame and there was a lot of disappointment. And again, when you cross that forbidden line, it's really difficult to turn around and try to go back to some semblance of that life that you blew up?
For me, it was, it's so easy to say now. It was help. I was embarrassed. I was holding it together. I felt at times I was barely holding it together. And I was trying to look for help in all the obvious places, families, friends, services. I was hustling, working here part-time, just to try to piece something together. And it always came down to help. I didn't know, where to look, where to ask, who to ask. I was even embarrassed. It was even hard to ask for help from my own family. And I was, just trying to piece it all together. And I was, I think back to that time and I was like, many can still say that I'm quite stubborn, but I was extremely stubborn. But it was led by, I think pride. It was led by embarrassment. It was all led to those things. And I think help was the hardest thing that I could find. And also, like, short answer was maybe to what is the next step? I don't know. I just gotta, that I always like it. My addiction was the hustle, was trying to work through it, trying to figure it all out, trying to answer all my own questions, and trying to do that. And every chance I had some money in my pocket, I was paying $400 a week to sleep on someone's floor or something, just, but yeah, help was always the thing I was looking for, and I never knew how to ask it. And the hustle was my addiction, just trying to, but it just kept going around in a circle. I was like a cat chasing my own tail, if you will.
Yeah.
It's the best way I can describe it.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from one of our teachers, Mr. Mack. What is the difference or relationship between the term houseless and homeless?
Personally, it's something that I have recently learned. And it's been more something that I've been learning more and more, and I've been in the practice of stating houseless. There like we said in our discussions, through the panel, that there are many different reasons why people are on the streets. And there's a stigma with homelessness or with homeless. There is a definition by the government. There's a definition by our society. There is a definition by how those who want to judge one another, judge us, judge each other, by specifically using homeless. Homeless, kind of from what I've learned over the years, has actually kind of found its way into being derogatory when speaking about the community. They are, and I've heard this a lot from the streets in my own experience in this last year. It's like, there was a gentleman living within my district who lives in a van, and him and I, we went toe to toe in a few times in some heavy discussions, and we started trusting one another and communicating with one another. And he's like, I'm not homeless. I'm houseless, but I ain't homeless. That van and my dog is where my home is. And he's like, but the government tells me I'm homeless. The government is telling me this. And I've heard that from many, many different people. I can even say I have family who travel throughout the country, who live out of a smaller RV, and they choose to do so. Are they houseless or are they homeless? And so, I've been trying to be in better practice of being more articulate, and learning, what is right or what is wrong and what's preferred. And there's a lot of derogatory, there's a lot of bad stigma with the term homeless over houseless, because it's, short answer, maybe too late for that, is that we, again, as society, are telling people or identifying who they are. We're telling them that they're homeless. We're telling them this, that we're telling them that. And I think that houseless for me, what really kind of stuck for me was when the community started speaking back to me and explaining to me. They're like, I don't have, I have a home, I just don't have a house.
I'm curious
Thank you for
if the
that.
other panelists have heard similar things, because again, like working in social justice education, like I hear that switch. I was also curious about that question.
So if I might, I'll just speak up. 50 some odd years on this planet, it's hard to make that change intellectually. I mean, not intellectually, I guess linguistically. So yeah, I will often, use words interchangeably. Looking at things as a realtor, I mean, everything to us is a home, right? You're selling that home, that home, that home. And serving people here who are homeless. Again, I have no personal experience other than through the people that I serve, and they refer to themselves not as houseless, but as homeless. But I would say the most important thing is not to stigmatize folks and focus on getting them, that is, anyone who's challenged with finding, keeping, getting housing, focus on solving the problem. Make that the main issue, rather than focusing so much on semantics. I guess I'd say I'm not trying to minimize anything. I'm just expressing my own opinion about, the important thing is to solve the issue and help more people, rather than worry about, I mean, words are important. I know, I totally get that. But yeah, that's what I want my main focus to be, though, is on helping others.
I think home relates to a sense of belonging. And so when we call somebody homeless, it can conjure up the sense that they have no belonging, they have no place, that they're not connected to the greater society. But a house is a structure that we all have an idea of what a house means, and they are without that structure to live in. So to me, it's the same as saying that person, like they are mentally ill, instead of, oh, they live with a mental illness. It's not all of who they are. It's an aspect of who they are in their current reality.
Go ahead, Mary Grace. If it's okay that we go a little bit later for a couple more questions, I understand if people have to leave, but thank you.
Yeah. So this isn't a question, but we do have a comment of thank you so much for sharing your point of views. You guys were very inspirational. That was just one of the things there. Our next question is from our Director of Diversity and Inclusion, Ms. Mounsey, who asks, as a mom of 2 young boys, age 5 and 7, how can I get them involved in partnering with your organizations? And she also says, thank you so much for those who shared your personal stories with us today.
Well, I'll just speak. It's obviously my organization is not one that you're referring to, I'm sure, but I just wanted to, it made me think of my personal experience, in that I grew up in Phoenix. My parents were regular volunteers at soup kitchen there. And we would go at those ages, right, at very young ages, and we couldn't help out much, but we would play in the corner and witness the interactions between my parents and the folks who were being served, the customers that were coming through. And that was really impactful, right? I mean, kids are always watching, as you know, if you're a parent. And so I think even that, unfortunately, because homelessness is so rampant, so visible in our community, there's endless opportunities to talk with our kids too about what those people might be experiencing and what's underneath their houselessness, just like we've been talking about today. So I think that alone is really, really powerful and impactful for our kids.
I think I've had, over the last year, I've had a lot of parents, whether they're picking up donations, dropping off donations, moving things around, for myself and many others, there's always, they've always had, younger children. Some of these children I've gotten to know a little bit, through the drivers and whatnot. And one of the biggest things for me is to be honest, with your children about what is happening in our communities, what's happening in your community specifically, or what's happening in our city. My parents were always very honest with me what was happening when I was a young child. And I think, being young ages 5 or 7 or in that age realm, there may not be a lot of help, but it's like, if there is an opportunity to bring donations somewhere and explain to your children why we're doing this, whether it's even a Portland free fridge, or whether it's a soup kitchen, or whatever it may be in that person's community. I think I came up, I came up a little bit different. My parents were very, very honest with me, and I think that does so much better than just trying to we don't need to talk about this, or we don't and just try to explain what's happening, whether you may know or not know, and just try to get your children involved in a conversation like that, even at a young age. Like I was with my parents, and it can speak volumes. It definitely can.
I guess one more question, and then we'll end with prayer. What can one of us say to a stranger to help when we don't have much more than a meal or a word to offer?
Also something, I don't think it's any specific word. I think it's taking the time to acknowledge that person and make a connection with them. Because I think once, there's shame and there is disappointment in oneself, and then you look at the way society just doesn't see you or looks down upon you if they are looking at you. So again, it's taking that time to just let them know that they're being seen, that we see them, we love them. It's not for us to judge where they're at a certain point of their journey. God loves us all equally, no matter where we're at on their journey. And I think that when we extend that same compassion and love to our brothers and sisters, what makes them any less deserving of love than we are? I mean, undisputably, God's grace was extended to me at my most undeserving moment. And I think that that's the least we could do to our brothers and sisters, or for our brothers and sisters.
I'd also add, and I've also learned, I also agree, words are not necessarily, the right word or whatnot. I think kindness and respect, courtesy, but also just asking if you have a meal and a bottle of water that you want to hand out to somebody. And I have learned this the hard way, and I mean the hard way, that asking someone how their day is can really change somebody's life. And maybe when I was younger, I didn't really understand what that meant, but I'll tell you one doggone thing, I definitely understand what that means now. And it can really, I've seen so many people when I've asked people that on a day-to-day, and just trying to have a conversation with them just because it's a beautiful day and let's talk about something positive, and they're like, you want to talk to me, you care that you there's a line of food, and I'm like, we're not talking about those people, we're talking about you right now. And I think just have the kindness in your own heart, just to say hi and start a conversation, and there's nothing to be afraid of.
Thank you. I think with that, we will close it and head to our closing prayer. There are a couple other questions here that I snapped a picture of and I can forward on for all of you. And also, if there is something that comes up, a food drive, a clothing drive, something, please let me know, and we will absolutely get that done for someone. And other than that, we'll just stay in touch. And I am just so grateful and appreciative of everyone here and what has been shared. So I have Cameron here to lead us in a closing prayer. So take it away, Cameron.
Thank you so much. Let us remember.
And that we're in the holy presence of God.
O Lord, to whom no one is a stranger and from whose help no one is ever distant, look with compassion on those without a place to live. Restore them, we pray, to a home of their own, and give us a kind heart to help the homeless in their needs. We ask through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. St. John Baptist de la Salle,
Pray for us
live Jesus in our hearts.
forever. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you. Does anybody have any closing thoughts or comments or anything before we sign off?
I just
Thanks
want
for
to say
having
thank
us.
you.
Yeah.
Everyone at once.
Cheers.
I'm grateful I was able to meet these fellow panelists of mine. I probably would have never met them before. And I only wish that, COVID weren't around, so we had a chance to talk in person.
Mm.
Yeah, thank
Next
you again
year.
so much.
Yep.
I'll definitely be in touch about a food drive for Portland Central Kitchen as well. So
Absolutely. Please.
and I just want to say to the student panelists again, I wish honestly, I wish I was doing more when I was in high school or middle school, but thank you so much for hosting us and having this part of this discussion and being involved and wanting to learn more. So and write your representatives.
And for anyone here, Kristen, listen, 10, I think 11, because I have one too, copies of her book, and it's in my office. So stop by, grab one, pass them around, return to me whenever, but they're incredibly powerful. Mary Grace is reading it now. Ms. Banta read it. I have read it. I have several copies here, so stop on by.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.